The grand halls of Ashford Manor had witnessed many tragedies, but none so painful as the silence between its master and the woman who could save him. Dr. Eleanor Carmichael stood in the entrance hall, her medical bag clutched tightly, while upstairs the Duke of Ashford lay dying. 3 years had passed since he had publicly denounced her, destroyed her reputation, and declared her unfit to practice medicine in his county. Now his children knelt before her, tears streaming down their young faces, begging her to set aside her pride and save the father who had once destroyed her. She looked at their desperate eyes and realized that tonight she would face the man who had nearly broken her, the man she had once loved, and she would have to decide whether some wounds were too deep to heal. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. In the autumn of 1908, the county of Devonshire knew Dr. Eleanor Carmichael as an anomaly, a curiosity, and to some, an abomination. She was one of the few women in all of England who had earned a medical degree, graduating with honours from the London School of Medicine for Women. Her father, a country physician of modest means, had encouraged her unconventional ambitions before his death, leaving her a small inheritance and a burning desire to prove that a woman's hands could heal as skillfully as any man's. Eleanor had established a modest practice in the village of Thornwick, treating primarily women and children who felt more comfortable with a female physician. Her consultation room was simple but immaculate, lined with medical texts and the latest journals from Edinburgh and London. At 26, she was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, with intelligent grey eyes, chestnut hair always pinned in a practical style, and an air of quiet confidence that some found inspiring and others found threatening. Her life had settled into a comfortable rhythm of morning consultations, afternoon house calls, and evenings spent studying the latest medical advances. She lived with her widowed aunt, Mrs. Beatrice Hartley, in a stone cottage on the edge of the village. Aunt Beatrice, a sharp-witted woman of 60 with silver hair and an independent spirit, had defied her own family to support Eleanor's medical education. "You were born for greater things than needlepoint and tea parties," Beatrice would often say, watching Eleanor pore over her medical journals by lamplight. "Your father knew it, and so do I." The tranquility of Eleanor's existence was disrupted in the spring of that year when she received an unexpected summons to Ashford Manor, the grand estate that dominated the county. The Duke of Ashford, Lord William Ashford, had requested her presence to examine his daughter, Lady Catherine, who had been suffering from persistent headaches and fainting spells that the family's London physician had failed to diagnose. Eleanor had heard much about the Duke. He was 32, had inherited the title 5 years prior upon his father's death, and was known throughout Devonshire as a progressive landowner who had implemented modern farming techniques and established schools for the children of his tenants. He was also a widower, his young wife having died in childbirth 3 years earlier, leaving him with 2 children, Lady Catherine, age 7, and Lord Thomas, age 5. The Duke himself was described as handsome in a classical way, with dark hair, penetrating blue eyes, and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. He sat in Parliament during the season and was considered one of the most eligible bachelors in England, though he showed no interest in remarrying. When Eleanor's carriage arrived at Ashford Manor on that bright May morning, she was struck by the magnificence of the estate. The manor house was a stunning example of Jacobean architecture, with its distinctive gables, mullioned windows, and formal gardens that stretched toward ancient woodlands. Servants in immaculate livery greeted her at the entrance, and she was shown into a morning room where the Duke awaited. William Ashford rose as she entered, and Eleanor felt her breath catch slightly. He was taller than she had imagined, with an aristocratic bearing softened by genuine warmth in his eyes. He wore a dark suit that emphasized his athletic build, and when he smiled, she noticed the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he laughed often. "Dr. Carmichael," he said, extending his hand in a gesture that surprised her. Most men of his station would not have offered a handshake to a woman. "Thank you for coming. I have heard remarkable things about your diagnostic skills." Over the following weeks, Eleanor became a regular visitor to Ashford Manor. Lady Catherine's condition proved complex, requiring careful observation and treatment. Eleanor diagnosed the child with a combination of eye strain and nervous exhaustion, prescribing spectacles and a modified routine that reduced her academic pressures. The improvement was dramatic, and the Duke's gratitude was profound. "You have given me back my daughter's smile," William said one afternoon as they walked through the manor's rose garden after Eleanor's examination of Catherine. The London physicians treated her as though her symptoms were mere female hysteria. You alone took the time to truly understand. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. William spoke of the loneliness of his position, the weight of responsibility for hundreds of families whose livelihoods depended on the estate's prosperity. Eleanor shared her struggles to be taken seriously in a profession that viewed women as inherently inferior. "I believe the medical establishment is on the wrong side of history," William declared one evening as they took tea in the library. "In 10 years, 20 years, women physicians will be commonplace, and men will wonder why they ever opposed it. You are simply ahead of your time, Dr. Carmichael." Eleanor felt something dangerous blooming in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace that crackled nearby. She told herself it was merely gratitude, professional respect, but when their hands accidentally touched as they both reached for the same medical journal, the electricity between them was undeniable. The children adored her. Young Thomas would run to greet her carriage, and Catherine began calling her "our Dr. Eleanor." The household staff treated her with a respect rarely afforded to women of her profession. Even Mrs. Pemberton, the formidable housekeeper, smiled when Eleanor arrived. By midsummer, Eleanor and William had fallen into an unspoken courtship. Their meetings were always properly chaperoned, yet the connection between them deepened with each conversation. He brought her rare medical texts from London. She taught him about the latest surgical techniques being developed in Vienna. They discussed philosophy, politics, and the changing world around them. Aunt Beatrice noticed the change in her niece immediately. "You're in love with him," she said one evening, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Eleanor tried to deny it, but the truth shone in her eyes. "It's impossible, Aunt Beatrice. I am a village physician. He is a duke. He is a man. And you are a woman," Beatrice replied. "Everything else is merely circumstance." But Eleanor knew that in Edwardian England, circumstance was everything. The social chasm between a duke and a physician's daughter was vast, perhaps unbridgeable. Yet when William looked at her with those intense blue eyes, when he spoke to her as an intellectual equal, when he asked her opinion on matters of estate management and child-rearing, she allowed herself to hope. The summer garden party at Ashford Manor in August was the social event of the season. Eleanor was invited, ostensibly in her capacity as Lady Catherine's physician, but everyone knew the true reason. She wore her finest dress, a simple but elegant gown of dove-grey silk that Aunt Beatrice had helped her select. As she moved through the crowds of aristocrats and gentry, she felt the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations. William sought her out immediately, leading her to a quiet corner of the terrace where they could speak privately. "You are radiant today," he said softly. "Eleanor, I must speak with you about something of great importance. Not here, not now, but soon. Will you meet me tomorrow in the rose garden at 3 o'clock? Her heart hammered in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I will." That night, Eleanor barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities. Could he truly intend to propose? Would a duke ask a physician to be his duchess? It seemed like a fairy tale, yet she had seen the way he looked at her, had felt the sincerity in his every word and gesture. She did not know that in a townhouse in London, William's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, was receiving a very different sort of visitor, one whose arrival would shatter Eleanor's dreams and set in motion a tragedy that would echo through 3 years of silence and separation. The morning of the fateful meeting dawned clear and bright, with the kind of golden sunlight that made the Devonshire countryside shimmer like a painting. Eleanor dressed with unusual care, choosing a walking dress of soft blue that Aunt Beatrice said brought out the grey of her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her hat, and Beatrice, watching from the doorway, felt a flutter of maternal anxiety. "Are you certain about this, my dear?" Beatrice asked gently. "The aristocracy has its own rules, its own expectations." "He is not like other aristocrats," Eleanor replied with quiet conviction. "He sees me as I truly am, not as society defines me. Whatever he wishes to discuss, I trust him completely." The carriage ride to Ashford Manor seemed both endless and far too brief. When Eleanor arrived at the rose garden at precisely 3 o'clock, she found William waiting, but something was immediately wrong. His posture was rigid, his expression carefully neutral, and standing beside him was an elegant woman in her 50s, with cold grey hair and colder eyes, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford. "Dr. Carmichael," William said formally, his voice lacking any of its usual warmth. "Thank you for coming. My mother wished to meet you." Eleanor curtsied appropriately, her instincts screaming danger. The Dowager Duchess examined her with the detached interest one might give to a specimen in a laboratory. "So you are the provincial physician who has been treating my granddaughter," the Dowager said, her voice like cut glass. "My son has spoken of your competence." The pause before competence was deliberate, weighted with disdain. Eleanor felt her spine straighten defensively. "Lady Catherine has recovered completely, Your Grace. The treatment protocol was quite straightforward once the proper diagnosis was established." "Indeed." The Dowager's thin lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "William, I believe we should proceed with the matter we discussed." William's jaw tightened, and Eleanor saw something that made her blood run cold: resignation. He looked at her finally, and in his eyes she saw not love, but pity. "Dr. Carmichael, my mother has made me aware of certain concerns regarding your continued presence at Ashford Manor," he began, his voice strained. "It has been suggested that your frequent visits have given rise to speculation of an inappropriate nature." Eleanor felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Inappropriate? Your Grace, I have only ever conducted myself with complete professionalism. Every visit has been properly chaperoned. I have done nothing." "It is not what you have done," the Dowager interrupted sharply. "It is what you are. A woman who has abandoned her natural role to pursue masculine ambitions. A woman whose very presence in this family's affairs creates scandal." "Mother, that is unfair," William began, but the Dowager silenced him with a look. "What is unfair, William, is that you allowed this situation to develop. Did you truly believe that society would accept a connection between the Duke of Ashford and a common physician? Did you think your responsibilities to your title, your children, your name could be set aside for some romantic fancy?" Eleanor's voice was steady despite the tumult in her chest. "Your Grace, if I may speak plainly, I have never presumed—" "Have you not?" The Dowager's eyes were like flint. "Then why did you accept every invitation? Why did you insinuate yourself into my grandchildren's affections? Why did you allow my son to spend hours in your company, discussing matters far beyond your station?" "Because he asked me to," Eleanor said quietly, looking directly at William. "Because he told me he valued my opinions, my expertise, my company. Was that a lie, Your Grace?" William's expression was anguished, but when he spoke, his words were like daggers. "Dr. Carmichael, I have valued your medical services greatly. However, my mother is correct that I have perhaps allowed our professional relationship to become too informal. It was never my intention to suggest anything beyond appropriate gratitude for your treatment of my daughter." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Eleanor actually swayed on her feet. "You told me I was ahead of my time," she whispered. "You said the world was wrong about women physicians." And perhaps it is, William said, his voice hollow. But I live in this world, not in some future progressive age. I have responsibilities, Dr. Carmichael. My children need a mother who can guide them in society, not a physician who will make them objects of ridicule. My title requires an heir, and my bride must come from appropriate stock. The cruelty of those words, appropriate stock, hung in the perfumed air of the rose garden like poison. Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "I see," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "Then I apologize for any misunderstanding, Your Grace. I shall, of course, discontinue my visits to the manor." "That will not be sufficient," the Dowager interjected coldly. "The damage to my son's reputation from this association must be mitigated. William has prepared a statement for the county society, clarifying that while your medical treatment of Lady Catherine was adequate, your presence at Ashford Manor was purely professional, and any rumours to the contrary are without foundation." Eleanor's stomach turned. "A statement? You intend to publicly deny any inappropriate connection?" the Dowager finished. "It is for your protection as much as ours, Dr. Carmichael. Surely you understand that a woman in your unusual position must be above reproach." "Above reproach," Eleanor repeated numbly. She looked at William, searching his face for any sign of the man she had believed him to be, the man who had held her hand in the library and called her remarkable, but his expression had closed completely, become a ducal mask of aristocratic detachment. "One more thing," the Dowager said, reaching into her reticule and withdrawing an envelope. "We are prepared to offer you compensation for any distress this situation may have caused. £500, I believe, will be more than generous for a physician of your standing." The envelope seemed to burn Eleanor's eyes. It was not merely a payment. It was an insult, an attempt to reduce their connection to a financial transaction, to buy her silence and dignity. "Keep your money," Eleanor said, her voice finally breaking with emotion. "I do not want your compensation, Your Grace. I only wish to know one thing." She turned to William, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Was any of it real, or was I simply a diversion for a bored widower?" For a moment, just a moment, William's composure cracked, and she saw raw pain in his eyes. But then the mask returned. "You were my daughter's physician, Dr. Carmichael, nothing more." The words echoed across the rose garden, final and irrevocable. Eleanor turned and walked away, her spine straight, her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. It was only when she reached her carriage that she allowed the first sob to escape. But the humiliation was not finished. True to the Dowager's word, within 3 days, a notice appeared in the county society pages, signed by the Duke of Ashford himself. It stated formally that Dr. Eleanor Carmichael had provided medical services to Lady Catherine Ashford in a strictly professional capacity, and that any speculation regarding a personal relationship between the Duke and the physician was entirely unfounded and unwelcome. The notice went on to praise the traditional values of English society and to affirm that the Duke's future Duchess would be chosen from among the appropriate circles of the aristocracy. The damage was immediate and catastrophic. Patients began cancelling appointments. Mothers who had brought their daughters to Eleanor for treatment suddenly found excuses to consult male physicians instead. Whispers followed her through the village. Had she attempted to seduce the Duke? Had she used her position to gain inappropriate access? The very progressives who had once supported a woman physician now distanced themselves, unwilling to defend someone the Duke himself had publicly repudiated. Within a month, Eleanor's practice had dwindled to almost nothing. The women who had praised her skill now crossed the street to avoid her. The vicar, who had once welcomed her participation in village charitable work, politely suggested she limit her public appearances. Even the shopkeepers treated her with cool formality, afraid that associating with her might offend the Duke, upon whose patronage their livelihoods depended. Aunt Beatrice watched helplessly as her niece withdrew into silent grief. Eleanor stopped reading her medical journals, stopped responding to the few colleagues who wrote supportive letters. She moved through the cottage like a ghost, performing the minimum necessary tasks, but exhibiting none of her former vitality. "You must not let them destroy you," Beatrice pleaded one evening. "You are a skilled physician, Eleanor. Your worth does not depend on that man's recognition." But Eleanor barely heard her. The betrayal had cut too deep, the public humiliation too complete. She had not merely lost the man she loved, she had lost her reputation, her livelihood, and her faith in her own judgment. How could she have been so wrong about William? How could she have mistaken aristocratic courtesy for genuine regard? The final blow came 6 months later, when the announcement appeared in the London papers. The Duke of Ashford was engaged to Lady Marianne Thornbury, daughter of the Marquis of Westfield, a woman of impeccable lineage and appropriate breeding. The wedding would take place the following spring at St. Paul's Cathedral. Eleanor read the announcement with hands that no longer trembled, her heart already so broken that this fresh wound barely registered. She carefully folded the newspaper, placed it in the fire, and watched the flames consume the Duke's name, wishing she could as easily burn away the memory of his touch, his voice, his promises. The winter of 1909 was the darkest of Eleanor's life. She existed rather than lived, going through the motions of a practice that had shrunk to a handful of loyal patients, mostly the village poor who could not afford to be choosy about their physician's gender or reputation. The income was barely sufficient to maintain the cottage, and she knew that without Aunt Beatrice's modest annuity, they would have been destitute. It was Beatrice who finally forced change. In March, she announced that she was travelling to Bath to visit her old friend, Mrs. Dorothea Sinclair, and that Eleanor would accompany her. "I am not leaving Thornwick," Eleanor said flatly. "I have patients who depend on me." "You have 3 patients, all of whom can be referred to Dr. Morrison for the fortnight we will be away," Beatrice replied firmly. "Eleanor, you are dying here slowly but surely. You need to remember that there is a world beyond this village, beyond the Duke of Ashford's sphere of influence." Bath in early spring was beautiful, its Georgian architecture glowing in the soft light, its fashionable society promenading through the pump room and assembly rooms. Mrs. Dorothea Sinclair proved to be a woman much like Beatrice, sharp-minded, independent, and impatient with social conventions. She was a widow of considerable means who had used her freedom to become involved in various progressive causes, including women's suffrage and education reform. "So you are the brilliant physician Beatrice has told me about," Dorothea said upon their first meeting, examining Eleanor with keen grey eyes. "The Duke of Ashford is a fool, my dear, but then most men are when their mothers interfere. You are well rid of him." The casual dismissal of William's importance, the matter-of-fact tone, startled Eleanor. In Thornwick, the Duke's opinion was law. In Bath, he was merely another aristocrat whose decisions were subject to criticism and ridicule. Dorothea immediately took Eleanor under her wing, introducing her to Bath's intellectual circle, a group of suffragettes, reformers, physicians, and academics who met weekly to discuss politics, science, and social change. At first, Eleanor resisted, her confidence too shattered to engage, but gradually, surrounded by people who valued her medical expertise and treated her as an equal, she began to thaw. It was at one of these gatherings that she met Dr. James Blackwood, a Scottish physician who had established a clinic in Bath, treating primarily working-class families. He was in his late 30s, with red hair going grey at the temples, intelligent green eyes, and a dry sense of humour that reminded Eleanor of her late father. "A woman physician from Devonshire," he said when they were introduced. "You must be Dr. Carmichael. I read your paper on puerperal fever prevention in the Lancet. Brilliant work." Eleanor was stunned. "You read my paper? But that was published 3 years ago." "Good medicine does not expire, Dr. Carmichael," James replied with a smile. "Your protocols should be standard practice in every lying-in hospital in England. The fact that they are not is a testament to medical conservatism, not to any fault in your research." It was the first professional recognition she had received in months, and Eleanor found herself fighting unexpected tears. Over the following days, she and James fell into long conversations about medicine, public health, and the challenges facing physicians who worked outside the traditional power structures. "I heard about the Duke," James said one afternoon as they walked through Victoria Park. "A colleague in Devonshire wrote to me it was unconscionable what he did." Eleanor stiffened defensively. "I do not wish to discuss it." "Of course not. But I will say this. The medical community is small, Doctor. And Carmichael, and we remember both our allies and our enemies. The Duke made an enemy when he used his influence to damage your practice. There are many of us who would be honored to help you rebuild." The idea that she could rebuild, that her career was not finished, had not seriously occurred to Eleanor. "I cannot return to Thornwick," she said quietly. "The situation there is impossible." "Then do not return," James said simply. "Bath needs good physicians. My clinic needs someone with your obstetrical expertise. The pay would be modest, but the work would be meaningful, and no one here cares what the Duke of Ashford thinks." The offer was tempting, yet Eleanor hesitated. To leave Devonshire permanently would feel like defeat, like admitting that William had won. Yet what was the alternative? To remain in Thornwick, watching her practice wither, becoming a bitter recluse. Aunt Beatrice, when consulted, was unequivocal. "Accept the position, Eleanor. Bath is civilized, progressive, and far enough from Ashford Manor that you need never think of that man again. It is time to start anew." Eleanor accepted Dr. Blackwood's offer in May of 1909 with the understanding that she would relocate to Bath in September. The intervening months passed in a blur of preparation and farewell. Her handful of loyal patients received referrals to other physicians. The cottage was let to a retired schoolmaster. The life she had built in Thornwick was systematically dismantled. She did not see William during those final months, though she heard news of him occasionally. His wedding to Lady Marianne had been a grand affair. The new Duchess was beautiful, accomplished, and perfectly suited to her role. They spent the season in London, where she was a great success in society. Eleanor told herself she was glad, that she wished him well, but the wound remained raw. On her last day in Thornwick, she walked to the village churchyard where her parents were buried and stood before their headstones for a long time. "I tried to make you proud, Papa," she whispered. "I thought I had succeeded, but I was wrong about so much. I am leaving now, starting over, and I do not know if I will ever return." The September move to Bath was both easier and harder than Eleanor had anticipated. The city welcomed her with a warmth that Thornwick had ultimately denied. Dr. Blackwood's clinic was busy and well-respected, serving a population that desperately needed medical care. Eleanor found herself treating everything from childhood illnesses to obstetrical emergencies to injuries sustained in the city's factories and workshops. The work was exhausting but rewarding. Her colleagues respected her skills and sought her opinions. The patients, working-class women who had rarely seen a physician of any gender, were grateful for her care. Slowly, painstakingly, Eleanor began to rebuild not just her practice, but her sense of self. She rented a small but comfortable house near the clinic, and Aunt Beatrice, who had decided Bath suited her perfectly, took rooms nearby. They became fixtures in the city's progressive social circle, attending lectures, supporting suffragette activities, and hosting small gatherings of like-minded reformers. It was at one such gathering in the spring of 1910 that Eleanor met Lady Helena Ashford, William's distant cousin, a widow in her 40s who lived in Bath and shared Dorothea's passion for women's causes. Helena, unaware of Eleanor's history with the Duke, spoke casually of the family. "My cousin William has made a dreadful mistake with that marriage," Helena remarked over tea. "Lady Marianne is lovely to look at, but has the depth of a teacup. The children cannot stand her, and William looks positively miserable whenever I see him." Eleanor's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. "I am sure they will adjust," she murmured. "Perhaps," Helena said doubtfully. Though I heard the most troubling thing last month. Little Lady Catherine has suffered a return of her nervous attacks, and the new Duchess refused to call for a physician, insisting the child was merely seeking attention. William was away in London at the time, and by the time he returned, Catherine had made herself quite ill. Eleanor's professional instincts overrode her personal pain. She needed spectacles and reduced academic pressure, she said sharply. If those protocols are not maintained, the symptoms will recur. Eleanor looked at her with sudden interest. You speak as though you know my cousin's daughter, Dr. Carmichael. Eleanor realized her mistake too late. I treated Lady Catherine briefly several years ago, before relocating to Bath. Understanding dawned in Helena's eyes, followed by sympathy. Ah, so you are the physician. I had heard something of it, but the family does not discuss the matter. My dear Dr. Carmichael, I am so terribly sorry for what my cousin did. It was contemptible. The directness was both painful and oddly liberating. For the first time since the Rose Garden encounter, someone from William's social circle had acknowledged the injustice of his actions. It was a long time ago, Eleanor said quietly. I have moved forward with my life. Have you? Helena asked gently. Forgive my impertinence, but Beatrice has spoken to me of your dedication to your work, your involvement in all manner of causes, and yet she worries that you have built walls around your heart that may never come down. Eleanor did not reply, but later that night, alone in her study, she allowed herself to think about William for the first time in months. She wondered if he was truly unhappy, if he regretted his choice. Then she firmly pushed the thoughts away. William had made his decision, had chosen duty and social approval over anything he might have felt for her. She would not waste more of her life pining for a man who had proven himself a coward. But 3 years of silence can be broken by a single desperate cry, and Eleanor did not know that in Ashford Manor the Duke's children had begun counting the days until they could find the woman who had once made their father smile. The woman who alone might have the skill and the courage to save him from the illness that was slowly killing him and the coldness that had nearly destroyed them all. The late summer of 1911 brought Eleanor a kind of peace she had not thought possible 3 years earlier. Her practice in Bath had flourished beyond her most optimistic projections. She had become the preferred physician for many of the city's working-class women, and had earned grudging respect even from conservative male colleagues who initially dismissed her. Her reputation was built on meticulous care and diagnostic brilliance. She had successfully treated several cases that other physicians had declared hopeless, including a woman with a retained placenta, whom she had saved from certain death through a surgical procedure she had learned from correspondence with a Vienna-trained colleague. Word spread, and soon women were travelling from neighbouring counties to consult her. Dr. James Blackwood had become her closest professional ally and friend. Their clinic had expanded, adding a second examination room and a small surgical theatre. James treated her as an absolute equal, consulting her on difficult cases and deferring to her expertise in obstetrics and gynecology. Their partnership was the subject of much speculation. Surely a professional relationship between a man and woman must indicate romance, but the truth was simpler and more profound. They were colleagues who respected each other's skills and shared a commitment to serving the underserved. You have become essential to this city, Eleanor, James told her one afternoon as they reviewed patient files. When I think of the Duke who nearly destroyed your career, I am grateful for his short-sightedness. Bath's gain was Devonshire's loss. Eleanor smiled but said nothing. She thought of William rarely now, or told herself she did. When his name appeared in the society pages, the Duke attending Parliament, the Duke hosting a shooting party, the Duke's wife opening a bazaar, she skimmed past with barely a pause. The wound had scarred over, and if it still ached on cold nights, well, that was the price of having once loved foolishly. It was Aunt Beatrice who brought news that shattered Eleanor's carefully constructed equilibrium. She returned from an afternoon with Mrs. Sinclair looking troubled, and over dinner she said carefully, Eleanor, I heard something today about the Duke of Ashford. He has been ill for several months, with what the London physicians are calling a wasting disease. They cannot determine the cause. Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I am sorry to hear it, but I do not see what that has to do with me. Lady Helena was at Dorothea's today. She is deeply concerned. Apparently, the Duke's condition has deteriorated significantly, and his wife, the Duchess, has forbidden the children from discussing their father's illness with outsiders. Helena says the entire situation is most peculiar. Eleanor felt a flutter of professional curiosity despite herself. What are his symptoms? Chronic fatigue, weight loss, persistent low fever, pain in his joints. The London physicians have tried various treatments, but nothing has helped. Helena fears he may not survive the winter. That night, Eleanor lay awake, her mind racing with diagnostic possibilities. Wasting diseases could indicate anything from tuberculosis to cancer to parasitic infections. Without examining the patient, seeing his medical history, conducting proper tests, she could not even begin to form a hypothesis. And it was not her concern. William had made his choice years ago. His health was the responsibility of his London physicians and his aristocratic wife. Yet she could not stop thinking about it. About the children who had once called her our Dr. Eleanor. About the man who had held her hand in a library and told her she was remarkable. About the possibility that he might die, and she would never have the chance to tell him that she had survived, that she had rebuilt her life, that she was stronger than he had believed. The matter was forced to a crisis point 2 weeks later, when on a rainy October evening, Eleanor's housekeeper answered a frantic knocking at the door. Standing on the threshold, soaked and shivering, were 2 children in travel-stained clothes, Lady Catherine Ashford, now 13, and Lord Thomas Ashford, now 11. "Dr. Carmichael," Catherine gasped, "you must come. Our father is dying, and no one can help him. Please, you are our only hope." Eleanor stood frozen in shock as Aunt Beatrice rushed to bring the children inside, wrapping them in blankets and calling for hot tea. They were alone, having apparently travelled from Devonshire without chaperones, driven by desperate determination. "How did you find me?" Eleanor asked, her voice unsteady. "Lady Helena told us where you lived," Thomas said, his young face drawn with worry. "We ran away from school. We had to, Dr. Carmichael. Our father has been ill for 6 months, and he grows weaker every day. The physicians from London just shake their heads and prescribe more tonics. Our stepmother says it is God's will and we must accept it, but we cannot. We remember how you saved Catherine before. Please, will you come?" Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "Your father publicly repudiated me 3 years ago. He made it impossible for me to practice in Devonshire. Why would he want my help now? He does not know we are here," Catherine admitted, tears streaming down her face. "He does not know we remember you. How kind you were, how you made him smile. Dr. Carmichael, our stepmother is awful. She does not love us or our father. She cares only for her position and her social engagements. She has forbidden us from even speaking about Papa's illness. But we heard the servants talking, and we know he is dying. You are the best physician we know. Please, please come." Every rational instinct told Eleanor to refuse. William had made his position clear. He had chosen duty over love, reputation over integrity. She owed him nothing. Yet looking at these children's desperate faces, she could not bring herself to turn them away. "I will need to consult with his regular physicians," she said finally. "I cannot simply appear at Ashford Manor uninvited." "We will write to Lady Helena," Beatrice interjected. "She can pave the way, make the introductions. Eleanor, you cannot ignore this." The arrangements were made with surprising speed. Lady Helena, appalled that the children had travelled alone, but understanding their desperation, contacted the Duke's London physician, Sir Edmund Harcourt, explaining that a colleague in Bath had expertise in difficult diagnostic cases and might be willing to consult. Sir Edmund, facing a patient whose condition defied all his efforts, agreed readily. The journey to Ashford Manor 3 days later was surreal. Eleanor had not set foot in Devonshire for over 2 years, and as her carriage rolled through the familiar countryside, she felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. Aunt Beatrice accompanied her, providing steady support, but even Beatrice looked apprehensive as the manor's towers came into view. They were received not by the Duke, but by Sir Edmund Harcourt, a distinguished elderly physician with a white beard and tired eyes. "Dr. Carmichael, I confess I was surprised when Lady Helena suggested consulting you, but I am beyond caring about convention at this point. I've been treating the Duke for 6 months, and he continues to decline. Perhaps fresh eyes will see something I have missed." "Tell me everything," Eleanor said, slipping into professional mode. "When did the symptoms begin? What tests have been conducted? What treatments have been attempted?" Over the next hour, Sir Edmund laid out the case. The Duke had first complained of fatigue and joint pain in March. Initially dismissed as overwork, the symptoms had worsened. Weight loss despite adequate appetite, persistent low-grade fever, night sweats, increasing weakness. Tests for tuberculosis, cancer, and various infections had all been negative. Treatments with tonics, dietary changes, and even a course of mercury had produced no improvement. "And his mental state?" Eleanor asked. Sir Edmund hesitated. "Melancholy. He seems to have lost interest in everything, his estate, his children, even his parliamentary duties. The Duchess attributes it to the physical illness, but I wonder if there is not some deeper malaise of the spirit affecting his body." Eleanor felt a chill. "I need to examine him. That may prove difficult. The Duchess has been protective. She insists that her husband needs rest and quiet, not endless consultations." "Nevertheless," Eleanor said firmly, "if I am to be of any use, I must see the patient." Sir Edmund led them upstairs to the ducal chambers. Eleanor's heart pounded as they walked the familiar corridors, past the library where she and William had discussed philosophy, past the morning room where they had taken tea. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. The Duke's bedroom was darkened, the curtains drawn against the autumn sunlight. A figure lay in the massive four-poster bed, so still that for a moment Eleanor feared they had arrived too late. Then William turned his head toward the opening door, and their eyes met. He had changed dramatically. The vital, handsome man she remembered had become gaunt, his skin sallow, his eyes sunken. But those eyes, they widened in shock as he recognized her. "Eleanor," he whispered, and in that single word she heard amazement, longing, and shame. "Your Grace," she replied coolly, maintaining professional distance even as her heart shattered anew at his condition. "Sir Edmund has asked me to consult on your case." Before William could respond, another voice cut through the room like ice. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" The Duchess Marianne swept into the room, a vision of golden-haired beauty and aristocratic outrage. She was younger than Eleanor, perhaps 24, with the kind of classical features that graced society portraits. But her eyes were hard, and her expression as she looked at Eleanor was pure contempt. "Sir Edmund, I explicitly forbade additional consultations," Marianne said sharply. "My husband needs rest, not to be poked and prodded by every country physician in England." "Dr. Carmichael is not a country physician, Your Grace," Sir Edmund replied with quiet dignity. "She is a respected colleague with particular expertise in diagnostic medicine. Given the seriousness of the Duke's condition, I believed—" "You believed wrong!" Marianne turned to Eleanor. "You are Dr. Carmichael. I have heard of you. My husband's former physician." The pause was deliberate, laden with insinuation. "Your services are not required here. You may leave." "Marianne, please," William said weakly from the bed. "If Sir Edmund thinks you are too ill to know what you need," Marianne interrupted, her tone softening as she turned to her husband. "Darling, you must trust me to manage these matters. This woman's presence is highly inappropriate given the history." Eleanor felt her temper, carefully controlled for 3 years, beginning to rise. "Your Grace, I am here in a strictly professional capacity. If you have any concern for your husband's life, you will allow me to conduct a proper examination." "How dare you presume to tell me my duty to my husband?" Marianne hissed. "You, who attempted to seduce him when he was vulnerable after his first wife's death. You, who had to be publicly repudiated to end your inappropriate pursuit. You will leave this house immediately." The injustice of the accusation, the casual rewriting of history, was too much. "I pursued no one," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with anger. "Your husband invited my professional services, and when his mother deemed our acquaintance inconvenient, he threw me aside like refuse. But none of that matters now. What matters is that a man is dying, and my medical expertise might save him. If you truly care for him, you will set aside your jealousy and allow me to help." "Jealous? Of you?" Marianne laughed, a brittle sound. "You flatter yourself, Dr. Carmichael. You are nothing but a provincial spinster playing at medicine. My husband has the finest physicians in London attending him. We do not need your interference." "Stop!" William's voice, though weak, carried command. "Both of you stop. Marianne, Dr. Carmichael will examine me. That is my decision, not yours." Marianne's expression turned icy. "If you insist on this folly, William, I will not remain to witness it. But I warn you, Dr. Carmichael, if any harm comes to my husband through your ministrations, I will ensure you never practice medicine again. The Ashford name still carries weight, regardless of your progressive Bath friends." She swept from the room in a rustle of silk, leaving a tense silence in her wake. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself, then approached the bed. This close, she could see the extent of William's deterioration, the tremor in his hands, the beads of sweat on his brow despite the cool room, the way his breathing came shallow and labored. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I need to conduct a thorough examination. It may be uncomfortable, but I must ask you to trust me." William's eyes locked with hers, and in them she saw something that made her breath catch, not just hope, but recognition. "I have always trusted you, Eleanor," he whispered. "I was a fool to let you go." "We will discuss that later," Eleanor said firmly, though her hands trembled as she reached for her medical bag. "Right now, you are my patient. Nothing more. Sir Edmund, I will need your assistance." The examination took over an hour. Eleanor was meticulous, checking every system, asking detailed questions about the progression of symptoms, reviewing all previous test results. William bore it all with patience, though she could see each probe and palpation caused him discomfort. Sir Edmund watched with growing respect as Eleanor worked with focused precision. Finally, as dusk fell outside the windows, Eleanor stepped back. "I need to review the laboratory results more carefully, but I have a preliminary hypothesis." "Which is?" Sir Edmund asked eagerly. Eleanor hesitated, glancing at William. "It is highly unusual, and I could be wrong. I need to conduct one additional test, a blood analysis looking for specific parasites." "Sir Edmund, do you have access to a good microscope?" "In my laboratory downstairs. But parasites? The Duke has not travelled to any tropical regions." "Not all parasitic infections require foreign travel," Eleanor replied. "Your Grace, have you consumed any unusual meats in the past year? Game that was perhaps undercooked?" William frowned, thinking. "There was a hunting party last autumn. We had venison, wild boar. Catherine complained that her meat was too rare, but I assured her it was safe." Eleanor's expression grew intent. "And when did your symptoms begin?" "Late March, early April, approximately 6 months after the hunting party." Eleanor turned to Sir Edmund. "I believe we may be dealing with trichinosis, infection by Trichinella spiralis, a parasitic roundworm found in undercooked pork and game meat. It would explain every symptom, the fever, the muscle pain, the weakness, even the melancholy, as the parasites affect various body systems." Sir Edmund looked stunned. "But trichinosis is rare in England. I have never actually seen a case. Rare but not impossible, especially among the upper classes who eat game. The incubation period fits, the symptom progression fits, and critically, most physicians would not think to test for it because they do not believe it occurs in Britain." Eleanor's excitement was palpable. If I am correct, the treatment is supportive care and anti-parasitic medication. The Duke could recover fully. William had been listening intently. You mean I might not die? Eleanor looked at him, and despite everything between them, her expression softened. If my diagnosis is correct, and if we begin treatment immediately, you have an excellent chance of full recovery, but I need to confirm it with the blood test. The laboratory work took until midnight. Eleanor hunched over the microscope, examining slide after slide of blood samples, searching for the telltale encysted larvae. Sir Edmund waited anxiously, while Aunt Beatrice dozed in a nearby chair, and somewhere in the house, the Duchess sulked in her own chambers. Finally, as the clock struck 12, Eleanor straightened with a triumphant cry. "There, Sir Edmund, look!" The elderly physician peered through the microscope and gasped. "By God, you are right. Trichinella larvae, clear as day. Dr. Carmichael, your diagnostic skill is extraordinary. I have been treating the Duke for 6 months, and it never occurred to me. You were looking for common diseases in your demographic," Eleanor said generously. "Trichinosis is a diagnosis of exclusion, and one that requires specific expertise in parasitology. Now we need to begin treatment immediately." They returned to the Duke's chamber to find him sleeping fitfully. Eleanor woke him gently. "Your Grace, I have confirmed my diagnosis. You have a parasitic infection called trichinosis. It is serious but treatable. With proper care, you should recover completely." William's relief was palpable. "You saved my life." "Not yet," Eleanor said practically. "We have months of treatment ahead. You will need anti-parasitic medication, supportive care, careful monitoring, and you will need to be patient. Recovery will be slow." "I have been dying for 6 months," William said with a weak smile. "I can manage slow recovery. Eleanor, We will discuss everything once you are well," Eleanor interrupted gently. "For now, you must focus on healing." But fate and the Duchess had other plans. The following morning, Eleanor was preparing to return to Bath after leaving detailed treatment instructions with Sir Edmund when Catherine and Thomas found her in the garden. "Dr. Carmichael, you cannot leave," Catherine pleaded. "Our stepmother is saying terrible things about you. She is telling everyone in the household that you have come to seduce our father while he is vulnerable. She is threatening to have you barred from the county." Eleanor sighed. "Your stepmother is frightened and angry. I understand that. But it is not fair," Thomas protested. "You saved our father's life. You should be thanked, not slandered." "Life is rarely fair, Thomas." Eleanor knelt to be at eye level with the children. "But I promise you this. I will work with Sir Edmund to ensure your father receives proper treatment. And once he is recovered, he can deal with his wife's unreasonable behavior himself." "Will we see you again?" Catherine asked, her voice small. Eleanor hesitated. The truth was, she did not know. William's whispered words, "I was a fool to let you go," echoed in her mind, but 3 years of hurt could not be erased by a single sentence. He had made his choice, had married another woman, had built a life without her. That she had saved his life did not change the past. "Perhaps," she said finally, "but remember, you are both growing up. In a few years, you will be able to make your own decisions about whom you wish to see. Until then, be kind to each other, study hard, and trust that your father loves you." As her carriage rolled away from Ashford Manor that afternoon, Eleanor looked back once at the great house. William stood at his window, a ghostly figure, watching her departure. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he pressed his palm against the glass. Then the carriage rounded a bend, and he was gone. Aunt Beatrice took Eleanor's hand. "You did the right thing, my dear, both medically and personally. The rest is up to him." But Eleanor was not so certain. She had reopened a wound she thought had healed, and now she would have to live with the pain of knowing that William Ashford was alive, was married, and was forever beyond her reach. Unless, a small voice whispered in her mind, unless his gratitude and his whispered words meant something more than relief at a reprieve from death. Unless, after 3 years, some things could still be made right. Winter descended upon England with unusual severity in late 1911, and Eleanor threw herself into her work with an intensity that worried even James Blackwood. Her examination room stayed lit late into the evenings, and she volunteered for every difficult case, every emergency, every situation that might distract her from the knowledge that in Devonshire, William Ashford was slowly recovering under another physician's care. Sir Edmund Harcourt wrote to her weekly, providing detailed updates on the Duke's progress. The anti-parasitic treatment was working, though recovery was indeed slow. William's fever had broken within 2 weeks. His strength was gradually returning, and by Christmas, he was able to walk the manor grounds with assistance. Sir Edmund's letters were effusive in their praise of Eleanor's diagnostic brilliance, and insisted that she deserved full credit for saving the Duke's life. But there were no letters from William himself, and Eleanor told herself she was glad. What could he possibly say? "Thank you for saving my life. Now please disappear again while I resume my existence with the wife I chose over you." Better to maintain professional distance, to remember him only as a diagnostic triumph, not as the man who had once held her hand and called her remarkable. Lady Helena, however, was not so easily deterred. She appeared at Eleanor's clinic on a cold January afternoon, sweeping in with the kind of aristocratic determination that brooked no argument. "Dr. Carmichael, we need to talk about my cousin," Eleanor announced without preamble. "There is nothing to discuss," Eleanor replied, not looking up from the patient file she was reviewing. "The Duke is recovering. My involvement is concluded. Your medical involvement, perhaps. But, Eleanor, may I speak frankly? I am not blind, nor am I a fool. I know what happened between you and William 3 years ago. I know about the connection you shared, and I know exactly who was responsible for destroying it. My Aunt Margaret, the Dowager Duchess, is one of the most manipulative women in England, and I am ashamed to be related to her." Eleanor finally looked up, surprised by Helena's vehemence. It was not only the Dowager. William made his own choices. "He did," Helena agreed, "and he has been paying for them ever since. Eleanor, that marriage is a disaster. Marianne is cold, self-centered, and utterly indifferent to his children. She married William for his title and wealth, nothing more. She spends most of her time in London, avoiding the responsibilities of the estate. And William himself has been like a ghost these past 3 years, performing his duties mechanically but without any spark, any joy." "That is hardly my concern," Eleanor said, though her heart ached at the description. "He chose duty over love. Many people do. But now he has a second chance," Helena pressed. "Eleanor, William is recovering physically, but he is still dying spiritually. He needs someone to remind him what it means to truly live, someone who challenges him, inspires him, sees him as more than just a duke. He needs you." "He has a wife," Eleanor said flatly. "Whatever he needs, he cannot find it with me." Helena's expression grew crafty. What if that obstacle were removed? Eleanor stood abruptly. "Lady Helena, if you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting, I will not be party to it. I do not destroy marriages, no matter how unhappy. I am not asking you to destroy anything," Helena said quickly, "but I am asking you to keep an open mind. Things are complicated at Ashford Manor, more complicated than you know. Just promise me that if William reaches out to you, you will listen. Please." Against her better judgment, Eleanor nodded. "If he contacts me, I will listen. But I make no promises beyond that." William's letter arrived in February, on a day when sleet battered Bath streets, and Eleanor's clinic was packed with patients suffering from winter illnesses. She did not open it until late that evening, in the privacy of her study, with Aunt Beatrice hovering nearby. The handwriting was still slightly shaky, but unmistakably William's. "Dear Eleanor, Sir Edmund has told me that I owe you my life. The words seem inadequate, but they are true. You diagnosed an illness that was killing me, and you did so with the same brilliant intelligence I remember from our time together. I was a fool 3 years ago to let my mother's prejudices and society's expectations convince me to turn away from you. I have paid for that foolishness every day since. I will not insult you by pretending that a letter can undo the damage I caused. I publicly humiliated you, destroyed your practice in Devonshire, and chose a loveless marriage over what we might have had together. You have every right to hate me, to refuse any further contact, to spend the rest of your life never thinking of me again. But I must be honest, even if honesty comes 3 years too late. I never stopped thinking about you. Every medical journal I read, I wondered if you had read the same article. Every advancement in women's rights, I imagined you celebrating. Every evening I spent in my library, I remembered our conversations and how you made me see the world differently. I married Marianne to satisfy duty, but I have been married to the memory of you ever since. My situation is complicated. The marriage I entered into was a mistake, but it is a mistake with legal and social ramifications I am only now beginning to understand how to address. I am not asking for your forgiveness or your patience. I have no right to ask anything of you. But I needed you to know that saving my life has reminded me that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking scandal and social censure to achieve. If you wish never to hear from me again, I will understand. But if some small part of you can imagine a future where we might have a second chance, I will move heaven and earth to make it possible. Yours, if you will have me. William. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, her emotions rioting. Anger at his arrogance in thinking he could simply reclaim her after 3 years. Joy at the knowledge that he had felt as she had, that the connection between them had been real. Fear that allowing him back into her life would only result in fresh heartbreak. And underneath it all, a stubborn hope that perhaps things might be different this time. "What are you going to do?" Beatrice asked gently. "I have no idea," Eleanor admitted. "He is still married, still the Duke of Ashford, still part of a world that rejected me. Nothing has fundamentally changed, except that he is willing to fight for you this time," Beatrice pointed out. "That is no small thing." Eleanor did not reply to William's letter immediately. Instead, she spent weeks considering, weighing her options, trying to imagine various futures. A future where she maintained her independence and her peace in Bath, never seeing William again. A future where they attempted some sort of clandestine relationship, hidden from society. A future where he somehow freed himself from his marriage, and they could start anew. All of the futures seemed fraught with difficulty, yet she could not bring herself to close the door completely. After a month of deliberation, she wrote back, "William, your letter was unexpected, and I confess, unsettling. I have built a life in Bath that gives me purpose and satisfaction. I'm not the same woman I was 3 years ago. I'm stronger, more independent, and far less willing to compromise my dignity for any man, even one I once loved. You speak of fighting for a second chance, but I need more than words. I need to see evidence of actual change, of genuine courage to defy the society that you once let dictate your choices. I need to know that if we were to attempt any kind of reconciliation, you would not abandon me again at the first sign of social pressure. I'm not asking you to make grand gestures or rash decisions. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about what you truly want and what you are truly willing to sacrifice to achieve it. Until you can answer those questions definitively, we have nothing more to discuss. However, I will say this, I do not hate you. I never could. What we had was real, and it mattered. And if circumstances were different, if you were free and I was certain of your commitment, then perhaps we could explore what might still be possible between us. But that is a very large if, William. Do not contact me again until you can offer me something more substantial than regret and nostalgia. Eleanor. She sent the letter before she could second-guess herself, then tried to return to the comfortable routine of her Bath life. But something had shifted. The door she thought she had closed 3 years ago had cracked open again, and now light was spilling through, illuminating possibilities she had forced herself to forget. Spring arrived with surprising warmth, and with it came rumours from Devonshire that set Bath's gossip mill churning. The Duchess of Ashford had departed for London in March and had not returned. Lady Helena, visiting Eleanor's clinic in April, confirmed what everyone suspected. "The marriage is effectively over," Helena said bluntly. "Marianne has taken up residence in the Ashford London townhouse and is conducting herself indiscreetly. There is talk of an attachment to a much younger man, an Italian count of dubious reputation. William has remained at the manor with the children, and he has consulted solicitors about obtaining an annulment or possibly a divorce." Eleanor felt her heart skip. Divorce? But the scandal would be considerable, Eleanor agreed, but perhaps less catastrophic than you think. Society is changing, Eleanor. The old rigid rules are beginning to bend, and William has decided that he would rather face scandal with integrity than maintain a facade of respectability built on lies. He told me to tell you that specifically. He wanted you to know that he is done living according to other people's expectations. Eleanor spent a sleepless night pondering this news. Could William truly obtain a divorce? Even if he could, would society accept a divorced duke marrying a physician? Would Eleanor herself be willing to enter the aristocratic world that had once rejected her so cruelly? The answer to the last question, she realized with some surprise, was yes. If William could demonstrate genuine courage, if he could show that he had truly changed, then she would be willing to risk her heart again. But she would need proof, not just promises. That proof arrived in May, in the form of a newspaper article that sent shockwaves through English society. The Duke of Ashford had filed for divorce from his wife, citing irreconcilable differences and incompatibility. He had simultaneously announced his resignation from several prestigious social clubs and his intention to focus on managing his estate and raising his children. Most shockingly, he had publicly acknowledged his past mistreatment of Dr. Eleanor Carmichael, stating that he had allowed social prejudice to destroy a valuable professional and personal relationship, and that he deeply regretted his actions. The article was accompanied by an interview in which William spoke candidly about the need for social reform, the importance of women's contributions to medicine and other professions, and his belief that England's rigid class system was becoming obsolete. He did not explicitly mention loving Eleanor, but the subtext was clear to anyone paying attention. The scandal was immediate and immense. The Dowager Duchess issued a statement disowning her son's behaviour. Marianne's family denounced him as a traitor to his class. Half of London society declared him mad. The other half, particularly younger progressives, celebrated his courage. And Eleanor, reading the article in her study, while Aunt Beatrice peered over her shoulder, felt tears streaming down her face. "He did it," she whispered. "He actually did it. He burned down his entire world for you," Beatrice said wonderingly. "Now the question is, what will you do?" Eleanor did not have to consider long. She wrote to William immediately. "William, your actions have demonstrated the courage I needed to see. I do not know what the future holds for us, or whether we can overcome the years of hurt and separation, but I am willing to try. I am willing to see where this second chance might lead, if we approach it with honesty and mutual respect. I am not a duchess, and never will be. I am a physician, and I will not give up my practice or my independence. If you can accept that, if you can imagine a partnership between equals rather than a traditional aristocratic marriage, then perhaps we have something to build upon. Come to Bath when your immediate affairs are settled. We will talk, properly, honestly, about all the difficult things we avoided before, and then we will decide, together, whether what we feel is strong enough to withstand the challenges ahead." Yours, Eleanor. William arrived in Bath 2 weeks later, thinner than she remembered, but with a vitality in his eyes that had been absent before his illness. They met in the park, walking the paths as spring flowers bloomed around them. Two people who had found each other, lost each other, and now had one more chance to get it right. "I have made so many mistakes," William said, as they sat on a bench overlooking the River Avon. "I let fear and duty dictate my choices when I should have listened to my heart. I hurt you unforgivably, and I do not expect you to simply forgive and forget." "I do not forget," Eleanor replied honestly. "But I can forgive if you promise never to make me second to societal expectations again. William, I need to know that if we do this, if we truly try to build something together, you will stand beside me publicly, proudly, regardless of what society thinks." "I will," William said firmly. "Eleanor, I have lost my mother's approval, my wife, my position in half the social organizations I once belonged to, and I have discovered something liberating. I do not care. The only opinions that matter to me now are those of my children, my tenants who depend on me and you. Everyone else can go to hell." Eleanor laughed, despite herself. "I never thought I would hear a duke say such a thing. I am learning from a woman who has always lived according to her own principles," William said, taking her hand carefully. "Teach me how to be brave, Eleanor. Teach me how to build a life based on what matters rather than what society dictates. And in return, I will give you all the love and partnership I should have offered 3 years ago." They sat together as the sun set over Bath, two people who had traveled very different roads back to each other. The path ahead would not be easy. Divorce proceedings would take months, possibly years, and the scandal would follow them both. But for the first time since that terrible day in the rose garden, Eleanor felt hope blossoming in her chest. "We will take this slowly," she said. "I will not rush into anything, William. We need time to rebuild trust." "I understand," William replied. "I will court you properly this time. With honesty, with respect, and with absolute transparency about my intentions. And when you are ready, when you are certain, I will ask you to marry me, and I will not let anything or anyone stand in our way." Eleanor looked at him, this man who had broken her heart and then spent 3 years learning how to be worthy of a second chance. "Ask me now," she said impulsively. William blinked in surprise. "What? Ask me now?" Eleanor repeated, a smile playing at her lips. "Not as a duke asking a physician to elevate her station, but as a man asking a woman he loves to build a life with him as equals. Ask me now, and let me give you an answer you can hold on to through all the difficult months ahead." William slid from the bench to kneel on the path, heedless of the passers-by who had begun to stare. "Dr. Eleanor Carmichael, brilliant physician, stubborn idealist, the woman who saved my life in more ways than I can count. Will you marry me? Will you become my wife not because society demands it, but because we choose each other? Will you help me raise my children, manage my estate, and build a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love?" "Yes," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, William, I will marry you. As soon as you are free, as soon as it is legally possible, I will marry you." He rose and pulled her into his arms, and as they stood there in the fading light, Eleanor felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally knit back together. The road ahead would be difficult, but they would walk it together, and that made all the difference. 20 months later, in the late summer of 1913, Eleanor stood in the morning room of Ashford Manor, now truly her home, and marveled at how dramatically life could change when people chose courage over convention. The divorce had been finalized in December of 1912, after a lengthy and public process that had provided ample fodder for society gossips. Marianne, who had initially contested the proceedings, eventually agreed when her Italian count proposed, and she realized she preferred a more glamorous existence in Rome to the responsibilities of an English duchess. The settlement was generous, and she had departed for the continent without a backward glance at the children she had never loved. Eleanor and William had married quietly in March of 1913 in the village church at Thornwick, attended only by family and close friends. Aunt Beatrice wept throughout the ceremony. Lady Helena served as Eleanor's matron of honour. Catherine and Thomas stood as witnesses, their faces glowing with happiness. And Dr. James Blackwood, who had travelled from Bath, told Eleanor afterward that he had never seen her look so radiant. "You are blooming, my dear friend," James had said. "Bath will miss you, but Devonshire is lucky to have you back." Eleanor had indeed returned to Devonshire, but not as the woman who had left in disgrace 3 years earlier. She returned as the Duchess of Ashford, yes, but more importantly, as Dr. Eleanor Carmichael Ashford, a physician who had negotiated with her new husband to establish a modern medical clinic on the estate grounds, serving the tenant families and the broader community. The clinic had opened in May, funded entirely by William, but operated under Eleanor's direction. It was a bright, modern facility with examination rooms, a small surgical theatre, and a dispensary stocked with the latest medicines. Eleanor had recruited 2 young physicians fresh from medical school, 1 male, 1 female, to assist her, and together they were providing healthcare that rivaled anything available in London. The aristocracy's response to Eleanor's elevation had been predictably mixed. Some condemned William for his shocking choices, refusing to visit Ashford Manor or acknowledge the new Duchess. But others, particularly younger progressives and reform-minded nobles, celebrated the match. Eleanor had even been invited to speak at several London medical societies about her diagnostic work, and her paper on the Duke's trichinosis case had been published in the British Medical Journal, bringing her international recognition. "You have become something unprecedented," Lady Helena told Eleanor over tea one afternoon. "A duchess who practices medicine. A titled lady who spends her mornings in a clinic rather than in a drawing room. You are rewriting the rules, my dear, and it is glorious to watch." But Eleanor's greatest joy was not her professional success or her social triumph. It was the family she had gained. Catherine, now 15, had blossomed into a confident young woman who spoke passionately about attending university and perhaps studying medicine herself. Thomas, 13, was obsessed with agricultural reform and spent hours with his father learning modern estate management techniques. And William had become the man Eleanor had always glimpsed beneath his aristocratic armour. He managed the estate with progressive policies, paying his workers fair wages, establishing schools and healthcare access, implementing sustainable farming practices. He used his position in Parliament to advocate for women's suffrage and labour reforms. He was no longer merely a duke performing his duties, but a man actively working to make his corner of England better. Their marriage was everything Eleanor had dreamed of during those dark years of separation. They were partners in the truest sense, consulting each other on major decisions, supporting each other's work, challenging each other intellectually. William had converted the manor's library into a shared study where Eleanor's medical texts sat beside his political journals, where they spent evenings reading companionably and debating the issues of the day. And yes, there was love. The kind of deep, mature love that came from truly knowing another person, from weathering difficulties together, from choosing each other daily despite the obstacles. Eleanor had never imagined that the life of a duchess could include such happiness, such freedom, such purpose. On this particular August morning, Eleanor was reviewing patient files when William entered, carrying their 2-month-old daughter, Lady Margaret Rose Ashford, named for Eleanor's late mother. The baby gurgled contentedly, and William's face showed the besotted expression he wore whenever he held his youngest child. She was fussing. A nurse said she wanted her mother, William reported, settling beside Eleanor on the sofa. "I think she is hungry." Eleanor took her daughter, marvelling at the miracle of this new life. After years of believing she would never have children, believing that her medical career had closed that door, she had discovered at age 31 that motherhood and professional success were not mutually exclusive. Dr. James Blackwood had delivered baby Margaret, travelling from Bath specifically for the purpose, and had declared afterward that Eleanor was the most composed patient he had ever attended. "A physician makes a terrible patient," Eleanor had joked from her birthing bed. "I knew every potential complication and imagined them all occurring simultaneously. And yet you handled it with perfect courage," William had said, holding their daughter with tears streaming down his face. "You are remarkable, Eleanor. You have always been remarkable." Now, nursing her baby in the morning sunlight streaming through the windows of Ashford Manor, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of betrayal, the years of rebuilding, the courage to risk her heart again, all of it had led here, to a life richer and fuller than she had ever imagined possible. Catherine appeared in the doorway, dressed for riding. "Mama, Eleanor, Papa, I am going to the village to help Mrs. Thompson with her baby's feeding difficulties. Dr. Harrison said she trusts my observations now, and I am to report back if there is any concern." Eleanor smiled. Catherine had begun calling her Mama Eleanor shortly after the wedding, a compromise that honoured both her late mother and her new stepmother. "Remember to wash your hands thoroughly before and after examining the baby," Eleanor reminded her. "And observe the home conditions. Nutrition affects lactation significantly." "I remember," Catherine said with a grin. "I have been learning from the best physician in England." She swept out in a swirl of skirts, and William laughed. "She is going to be formidable," he observed, "just like her stepmother." "She is going to have opportunities we could only dream of," Eleanor corrected. "By the time Catherine is ready for university, women's education will be far more accepted. She will have choices, William, real choices about her future. Because of pioneers like you," William said, kissing her temple. "You have changed this family, Eleanor. You have changed this entire estate. Hell, you have changed me. I was a coward living according to duty, and you taught me to live according to principle." Eleanor looked up at him, this man who had once broken her heart and then spent years earning back her trust. "We saved each other," she said softly. "You gave me back my faith in love, and I gave you permission to be more than your title." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper who had been one of Eleanor's earliest supporters after her return to Ashford Manor, entered with a silver tray. "Telegram for your grace," she said, handing it to Eleanor. "From London." Eleanor opened it curiously, then gasped. "William, it is from the Royal College of Physicians. They are inviting me to present a lecture series on diagnostic medicine for rural physicians. They want to establish a training program based on my clinic model." William whooped with joy, startling baby Margaret, who began to cry. "Eleanor, this is extraordinary. The Royal College has never invited a woman to present before." "Times are changing," Eleanor said, soothing her daughter. "Slowly, painfully, but they are changing. And we are part of that change, William. Every choice we make, every convention we challenge, every young woman who sees what is possible, it all matters." That evening, as dusk settled over the Devonshire countryside, Eleanor walked through the estate gardens that had once been the site of her greatest humiliation. The roses bloomed as beautifully as ever, but now when she looked at them, she felt no pain, only gratitude for the circuitous path that had led her back to this place on her own terms. William joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about the woman I was 3 years ago," Eleanor replied, broken, angry, convinced that love had destroyed me. "And I am thinking about the woman I am now, a physician, a duchess, a mother, a partner to a man who finally had the courage to choose love over duty. I am thinking that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest transformations." "Do you forgive me?" William asked quietly. "Truly forgive me for what I did?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I forgive you," she said finally. "But more importantly, I forgive myself for almost letting your betrayal define me. I could have remained bitter, could have shut my heart completely, could have refused this second chance. But I chose hope instead, and look what hope has brought us. They stood together in the rose garden as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had learned that true love required not just passion but courage, not just commitment but growth, not just promises but action. The scandal of their marriage had faded, replaced by respect for the work they were doing, the family they were building, the example they were setting. "I love you," William said. "I loved you in the library 3 years ago, when I was too much a coward to fight for you. I loved you in my sickbed when you saved my life. And I love you now, more than I thought possible, because you taught me what love truly means. It means being brave enough to change, to challenge the world, to choose each other again and again, regardless of cost." "I love you too," Eleanor replied. "Not because you are a duke, not because you gave me this life, but because you finally became the man you were meant to be, and because you have given me the freedom to become the woman I was meant to be, not despite my profession, but because of it." As they walked back to the manor together, Eleanor caught sight of Catherine and Thomas in the library windows, their heads bent over books in the golden lamplight. She thought of baby Margaret sleeping in the nursery, of the patients she would see tomorrow in her clinic, of the lecture series in London that would allow her to train a new generation of rural physicians. She thought of Aunt Beatrice, living comfortably in the manor's east wing and serving as Margaret's doting grandmother, of Lady Helena, who visited monthly and never tired of reminding everyone that she had predicted this outcome all along, of Dr. James Blackwood, who wrote regularly with news from Bath and updates on their former patients. She thought of all the women who would come after her, the daughters and granddaughters who would have opportunities she had fought to create, the physicians, the professionals, the women who would never have to choose between love and ambition, between family and career, because pioneers had proven that both were possible. And she thought of the journey that had brought her here, through heartbreak and humiliation, through exile and rebuilding, through the courage to risk everything one more time. The path had been painful, but standing here in the rose garden of Ashford Manor, with William's hand in hers and their future stretching before them like an unwritten book, Eleanor knew that every step had been worth it. Some flowers bloom only after the harshest winters. Some love stories require betrayal and separation to reveal their true strength. Some women must be broken before they can become unbreakable. Eleanor Carmichael Ashford had been all of these things, and in becoming them, she had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her, proving that sometimes the most radical act of courage is simply refusing to let others define your worth, your potential, or your future. The Duke had drawn a cold line between them, but his children had begged her to heal their father, and in healing him, she had healed herself. Now they stood together on the other side of scandal and pain, building something new, something unprecedented, something beautiful. And that, Eleanor thought as they entered their home together, was the truest kind of triumph. If you have listened to this story until the end, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.